Hi, everybody. Welcome into the webinar. I want to welcome you all and our panelists that will be speaking with us today. I'm going to give a couple more minutes for folks to flow into the webinar. Once we get a pretty good mass, we'll get started. In the meantime, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So for folks who are coming in, you are muted and you're going to be off camera for the entirety of the webinar. The webinar is also recorded. If you want to communicate with us, feel free to use that little tiny chat box where you can send in any of your questions, comments, hopefully no concerns that you may have throughout the webinar. There's going to be a window of time for us to have a little bit of a discussion or a Q&A with our panelists. It'll be about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on where we are on time. So feel free to, again, put those comments and questions into the chat box and we'll address them at the end after the presentations. If you're planning on watching the recording or need a copy of the slides, rest assured we will send that in a follow-up email, as well as any other helpful resources like web pages or documents that are shared throughout the discussion. We'll have that out to you by tomorrow morning. You can also find the recording of the webinar on our YouTube channel at the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans or our website at nchv.org. So for those of you who are new to the work of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans, or NCHV for short, our role is to disseminate best practices and uplift communities to help put an end to veteran homelessness. We also connect service providers and folks who are at risk or experiencing homelessness to the resources that they need. And we also do a lot of work in the policy space. We're able to host this webinar through the generosity of the Home Depot Foundation, which the project began back in 2021. Feels like a long time ago. So now we're here in 2023. Our focus for this webinar series is optimizing internal operations to better serve vets. This is the second of 4, which we'll release weekly every Wednesday until November 8. If you missed the last one, you can again go back to our YouTube channel and watch it. It was on staffing challenges. It was excellent. This series, again, we're of course going to be hosting speakers from different areas of expertise to discuss the different ways to improve organizational performance that in turn ensure programmatic improvements that help veterans succeed. And our attention will primarily focus on the service providers in this series. So we want to highlight ideas on how to address the many operational challenges in this space. So today's topic, we're focused on fundraising strategies, particularly ways in which to access the different funding channels that are available, large and small, public or private. So we spoke to this point last week that in order to provide our clients quality services, organizations must be equipped with the resources to carry out their important work, and the costs of these services are no small expense. And according to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, the cost of meeting the unmet demand of sheltering people is estimated at $4.5 billion annually. So there has been excellent work done by our service providers to lower the count of homeless veterans throughout the country. And there are still thousands of those in need, and capacity and funding are intrinsically tied together, and there exists a very wide gap. So we have some very awesome panelists who will be speaking with us today to talk about those different fundraising channels that in turn help build organizational capacity. So kicking off our presentations today is Colleen Murakami, Chief Development Officer of Sorts to Plowshares. We'll talk about accessing public funding and ensuring that veterans are at the forefront of state and local planning. Then we have Kate Paolino, VP of Marketing and Development at the Alston Wilkes Society. She'll cover general contributions, special events, and ongoing constituent engagement. And lastly, Sean Reif, Director of Development at the Minnesota Assistant Council for Veterans. Sean will talk about navigating and access corporate funding sources. Each of the panelists will introduce themselves in their respective segment. I'm going to shut up now, go on mute, and go off camera. And like I said, always use the chat box to put forward any of those comments and questions, and we'll address them during the Q&A session. So Colleen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jay. Again, I'm Colleen Murakami. I'm with Sorts to Plowshares, and we're based in San Francisco. First of all, just a shout out to the Home Depot Foundation, because we love them. And I really do think that it's rare that you find a foundation that's so focused and so dedicated to what we all are doing. So thanks to those folks. Yeah, so Jay reached out to me about participating in this, and I think originally the ask was to present about individual giving. And for some reason or another, I decided that this was a better topic. I think if you had asked me 5 years ago to talk about public funding, it's not something that I would have done. But here we are, and I think that it's really important because our executive director, Michael Blecker, he's one of the co-founders of NCHB, and really all of this work and all of the landscape really started with public funds and really getting out there and having a loud voice and being an advocate. So it is a topic that I find very powerful. So next slide, please. So I think, hopefully those of us in the field agree that funding for veterans is inadequate. It seems that there's really a pervasive misunderstanding that VA does everything, and VA is a wonderful institution and a really important partner. And they've come a long, long way in the last 15 years, but they don't do everything. And they rely on us to contract with them to provide services in the community. But what ends up happening is a misunderstanding that at the local, at the state, and in the private sector, folks don't need to show up and provide that support and to open their wallets and to make a commitment because it's thought that the VA is doing that work already. And I found that even political leaders, even veteran political leaders, largely do not understand veteran issues. What typically happens is that they think, okay, maybe 75% of veterans use VA for their healthcare, but do they know that the majority go to VA once or twice a year? So the utilization rates really don't tell us much, right? And it really leaves out the story that veterans still need to access care and services at the community level. For those of you who are doing public fundraising, in addition to all the rest of the work that we all have to do as fundraising experts, what I'm sure you find is that there's veteran fund, right? There's the HVRP program under DOL, which is wonderful, but it's still one bucket of dollars. And what I've found at the state and local level is that oftentimes those veteran funds are quite limited compared to other cohorts. And what's been bothering me lately is thinking about the fact that veterans are everybody, right? They are veterans, sure. So we should leverage veteran buckets of dollars, but they are members of the LGBT community, they are seniors, they're mothers, they're immigrants, they're people of color, and they really shouldn't always be put into that one bucket. It leaves folks behind. And at the same time that we haven't really made enough progress at the state and local levels in convincing our leadership and convincing our sources of funding that veterans deserve more of their fair share. The sea of goodwill is drying up, as I'm sure everybody's experiencing, right? The initial investment from the private sector, from individuals around the country, several years into the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was just an outpouring of support, and that is really drying up. We're really not seeing that anymore, and yet still funders are telling us, well, this is the veteran initiative, or we don't fund veteran programs anymore, when you're coming to them to convince them to fund a mental health program or a program for veterans of color. Next slide, please. So one thing that occurred to me in thinking about this was that the same rules apply. I've been at Swords to Plowshares for 15 years, and for most of that time, it really didn't take much of an effort to get involved with the public fundraising, because historically we had sort of siloed those activities, and it was really led by our program leadership. And what I've learned in recent years is that it really needs to be in coordination with your policy team, your program staff, your executive team, and of course the development folks. It helps to move the priorities along, get on the same page. And, I like to think that development and communications folks are good at relationships and networking and really having open lines of communication and moving those things along. Whereas program staff may also have those skills, but they are busy with their day-to-day work. So I do think that it's important for it all to be integrated. And we all know that people fund those that they like. They don't necessarily fund the cause. They don't necessarily fund something because it perfectly aligns with their vision. Sometimes they fund your organization because they like you. So I do think it's important to show up, speak up, offer insights, not be shy, and get out there to meet lots of people in different spaces. Next slide. So there's a woman that is really wonderful who works closely with us. She's a writer and advocate for veterans, and she always says nobody cares about veterans. And it's sort of true, right? You find that it's a popular topic that people will never say that they don't support veterans, but then do you see it in all of the deeds and actions, right? So it's really upon us to make sure that people put their money where their mouths are, right? That it's not just in words, but it is in deeds, and that we see it pragmatically in our work, and we can actually track it, and we can hold folks accountable. So I think that there's, these 4 buckets here, right? Supporting veterans is a political win. I think that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, folks can agree that supporting veterans is a political win, even though I'm saying people don't care about veterans, but it's really just then what is the action after that, right? So these 2 concepts are quite at odds, but I found it to be true. So for us, I think finding opportunities to be part of the solution to ensuring that veterans get their fair share, right? For example, being co-founder of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans in California. We're a co-founder of the California Association of Veteran Service Agencies. So those doing this work and in the field coming together as a coalition to advocate for veterans' fair share. And oftentimes what you find is that your local leadership and your state leadership, they find it to be politically interesting, and that they can get folks to support something that they're introducing if veterans are included in those plans. And like I said earlier, it's really astounding how many state and local leaders and federal leaders are quite undereducated about veterans issues. So it's really important to get out there and to spend time educating those folks about what those specific needs are, about who veterans really are, and about where VA comes in to help and support, and where they fall short, where the community-based organizations are able to find successes in what we need in order to do a better job. So, we find that being present to make legislative recommendations or to just get to know folks and start planting seeds for anticipated needs of the veterans that we're serving is extremely important. So reading the fine print, I say that because what you'll find is that, in local and state planning, that, you may have a collection of folks in city government, et cetera, who are launching a strategic plan, let's say, to end homelessness in the community. And a lot of the times you'll find that veterans really are not called out. And this is a misstep for those folks in leadership, and also an opportunity for us to raise our voices and to ensure that veterans are included. And other times you'll see veterans called out, but then there's no there. There's nothing specific, and there's no specific commitment. So it's important to get those folks to make that commitment, and typically to do that publicly when the time is right. So making sure that we're pulling all those levers to ensure that veterans are written into state and local planning. And of course, getting a seat at the table, right? So these things don't happen in a bubble. Planning, legislation, including veterans in resource allocation. So making sure that you can get folks on your team, across the agency, your board members, your volunteers, your clients, to be sitting in on coalitions, commissions, advisory councils, because having that seat at the table is extremely valuable in the work that we do. I just wanted to share one quick example from our end. We in think 16, locally, some folks wanted to introduce legislation on the ballot, and it was to increase resources under a tax measure for seniors and folks with disabilities within the Disability Aging Office within San Francisco. We had never historically had any real connection to that office, but the folks who were organizing realized that veterans were a political win, that if they wrote veterans into the measure, and that it would be attractive to voters. When we were joining, we met all sorts of folks across that space, and what we were able to do was to open doors that we had never opened before. Folks serving seniors in the community and folks with disabilities had never considered bridging the divide between seniors and folks with disabilities and those who are unhoused. It was really the first time that unhoused people were really being invited into that space for additional resources. And fast forward all these years later, we continued that work to advocate for senior veterans. We joined coalitions and advisory councils and continued to hammer away the same message, that there is an urgent need for additional resources for senior veterans. They are aging. The Vietnam population represents the largest cohort, and we need to get going right now. We should have got going years ago in planning and allocation for this group of folks, and to keep them safe, stably housed, and not getting into long-term care prematurely. So we were able to then take what we learned locally and all the relationships that we formed and all the research that we had compiled over the years and advocate for a state pilot program for $25 million across the state. And we're just going to continue to do that work at the federal level and in other places. And I say that because it all started with political will and political interest and a local effort. So paying attention and really showing up and being consistent about that has paid off. And I'll end the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Good afternoon. I'm Kate Paolino. I'm the Vice President for Marketing and Development for the Alston Wilkes Society. We are in South Carolina. We're a statewide organization, a nonprofit organization, I should say. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little context about who we are, like I said, we're a statewide organization, nonprofit organization in South Carolina. We were founded actually by a Methodist minister who was working on reentry with former offenders. And, fast forward 30 years later, and we saw a need in South Carolina to help homeless veterans. And so an opportunity came up for us to work with the VA with a grant and per diem grant to open a transitional housing program for male veterans in Columbia, South Carolina. Fast forward again, and we currently operate 2 transitional housing programs for veterans in South Carolina, homeless veterans in South Carolina. We also operate a supportive services for veterans families program, and that is mostly statewide. And we still serve former offenders, federal offenders, and at-risk youth. But today we're talking about the entire organization in terms of fundraising strategies. Last year, we served 2,431 individuals, including 640 veteran households through our programs. Although all these programs have different funding sources, regardless of the funding source, they all need supplemental funding to keep their programs operating effectively and successfully. And so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Next slide, please. So these are our funding sources and strategies, and you'll see the first 2 are crossed out because Colleen kind of talked about these things, the grants at federal, state, local level, and contracts and that kind of thing. So we're going to concentrate today on general contributions, special events, in-kind donations, and then ongoing constituent engagement. Next slide, please. So planning is the key to success. I am a big planner. You should see my calendars, but a fundraising plan is essential to any successful fundraising program. So it doesn't need to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be, this big fancy formal document. It could be just an annual activities calendar in a spreadsheet. It could be you just take your calendar and you say, I want to put out a newsletter 4 times this year, and you just pick the dates, you get it down on paper, and you've got the start of a plan. I would say space out your strategies, but always provide an opportunity for folks to make a donation, even in your non-solicitation communications. So, for example, putting a remittance envelope, in your newsletter, if you have a print newsletter, or, including a QR code to your website's donation page. And that leads into the next point. Ensure that you have a place like a website, or even if it's Facebook, your Facebook page, to drive people to in all of your communications. You never want to put something out there and not have a call to action and a place for people to land where they can contribute. And then the other part of the planning, which is a little bit more difficult, is maintaining an updated constituent database. Again, it doesn't have to be a real big formal thing. It can be. We use a Blackbaud product, but the key part of that is keeping up with it, and that can be a lot harder than it sounds sometimes. So, and you want as much information as possible, because you're going to look, when we talk about annual fund and individual contributions, we can look at things like segmenting to targeting your communications to your audience. Next slide, please. So general contributions, the biggest part of a general contribution is the annual fund. Now, this you can structure however you want, whatever works best for your organization. You could do one big push at the year end during the holidays. You could do a big push at tax time. People are thinking about their tax deductions. Or you can decide you want to solicit 6 times a year, say. Either way, you've got to figure out what works for your organization and what's going to help you fulfill your goals. Always tell a story. You need to tell a story about what you're doing. You need to make sure that it focuses on the positive outcome. It's perfectly fine to talk about the needs and the issues that a client has been facing. You need to do that to set the stage. However, the bulk of the story needs to be what you did to help that person, and then what the positive outcome was at the end. Another kind of piggybacking on that issue, when you are sending out solicitations for contributions, you don't want to focus on the negative. So you don't want to say, we're in dire straits and we're suffering, and you want to show that a donation is going to a good, solid program that's going to lead to good, solid outcomes. Another strategy is to quantify for a potential donor what needs a donation will meet. On the back of a recent newsletter, yes, we still do print newsletters. I'll get into that in a moment. But we did include an infographic that outlined what $25 would do, what $50 would do, what a $100 donation could do. For example, $100 could pay a past due utility bill for a veteran household in need. We find that always helps not only pull a donor in, but it might also help you reach a goal because it suggests different levels of giving. One strategy that we're starting to concentrate on, which we haven't spent a whole lot of time on previously, but we find to be a valuable tool, is to secure monthly donors, or to get your current donors to start giving monthly. That helps a lot in terms of your cash flow and your planning purposes, and people are doing that a lot more. It can really increase the amount of a donation as well, because it feels less painful to the donor if they're giving monthly, and it adds up. Also, planned giving is something that you're going to want to mention probably at least once a year to your constituents, and because that's a viable option, and you never know when that could lead to a really nice donation. Next slide, please. This is my favorite, special events. We just finished one of our 2 big events for the year, and it was an oyster roast on the coast of South Carolina in Charleston. Be creative. We have not done many virtual or any virtual fundraising events, but I've seen them done. So you can do in person, you can do virtual. Again, I'm a planner, plan ahead. That means starting the day after your last event has taken place. That is so important to assess how your special event did, to identify any issues early for the next year. One little anecdote I have is that, and one thing I took away from this oyster roast was it did not occur to us to have a first aid kit on hand. And if anyone's ever been to an oyster roast, oysters can be quite sharp. And also, you've got the oyster knives. Well, we had some sharp oysters, and right off the bat, we had about 5 people in need of Band-Aids. So sure enough, on Monday morning, I started making a list, and Band-Aids and first aid kit for next year are already on that list. For in-person events like galas, parties, walks, you want to gather local volunteers first. I mean, right off the bat. That's going to save you a lot of time and effort in the long run. Your volunteers are the ones who are going to help you secure sponsorships. They're the ones who are going to help you secure items for auctions, and they can serve as your local planning committee. I am located in a different part of the state than what our oyster roast occurred in, and the volunteers were just key to helping make that successful. Plan a detailed budget and secure sponsorships. I think that goes without saying. One thing I wanted to touch on was use as much technology as you can to simplify the process. We used Eventbrite, which was fabulous. It made ticketing easier and promoting the event easier. It made check-in for the attendees much quicker. And so it saved us a lot of time. And then lastly, don't forget to advertise. You can do free, you can do paid, but you need to figure out who you're targeting this event to, and make sure you get the word out there so that you get the participation. Next slide. In-kind donations. We find for our veterans programs, especially because we're dealing with or working with veterans to rehouse them, that these can be as valuable as cash donations. Things like hygiene kits or furniture, household items, those are very, very valuable and usually make it onto our wish list. So develop an ongoing wish list. It can be by program, it can be agency-wide, but make sure you have one, and make sure your marketing and development staff are aware of the needs so that they can include them when they're out doing presentations. They can include them in newsletters and email blasts, just so that it gets the word out. In-kind donations make great group volunteer projects. We had a Girl Scout earn her silver award by conducting a hygiene kit drive for one of our programs. And she not only did that, but she created a presentation for us to use to recruit other groups to do donation drives too. Next slide, please. Excuse me. The last thing I'm going to talk about is ongoing constituent engagement. I am a one-person show at Alston Wilkes Society, and I really, really feel very strongly that it is important to communicate with our supporters, all of our constituents, even our clients, about the agency at other times other than asking for funds. You know, you can use annual reports to brag on your accomplishments for the year. You can do campaign updates if you've been running a specific campaign and you have some positive results to report. Any industry news, you know, we're coming up on Veterans Day. So what's the situation looking like in your state or your community? And then tailor your messages to the communication vehicle and your target audience. I mentioned printed newsletters before. We still do use printed newsletters because we found that there's a large part of our donor base that prefer print. That's not to say we don't do e-newsletters as well, but we are aware of that. We know that, therefore we still do it. Again, keeping up your database with current email addresses, mailing addresses, and phone numbers. Always be collecting information on people. For example, at your special events, you might have a table at a resource fair, you might have a table at a conference, but getting the names and contact information is key to getting a good database going. I say photos, photos, photos. I am constantly begging the program staff to get me photos to use in all of our fundraising and marketing efforts. Just, I would say, be sure to be careful that you have releases for people that you have in the pictures if you're going to use them on social media or in print. You know, one way we get around that is we take pictures of staff working with clients, and as long as you can't identify the client, so you take it maybe where the backs of their heads are showing, that sometimes will work too. And then share your success stories. Keep them short and sweet. And I think I talked about the success stories earlier and what kind of makes a good one and what to focus on. But you know, really relaying the personal stories of the people you serve is very, very powerful and a really, really good strategy. And next slide, please. And that's about it in a nutshell for what I have to talk to you today about. And I will turn it over to Sean now.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate Jay reaching out and asking me to present today and being part of this webinar. Also, thanks to Colleen and Kate for setting this up. I mean, following both of you puts it right into the things that are close and near dear to me. And Kate, I want you to go to our website because I think I'm doing all the things you said. So just to make sure I'm doing it right. But that's I can't agree with you more than 100% because you were doing and we're doing all the same things. So next slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization, and then I'm going to talk about corporate strategy, specifically to non-grant corporate strategies. So a little bit about myself. My name is Sean Reif, and I'm the development director for the Minnesota Assistant Council for Veterans, or MACV. And we've been around for about 32 years. I was in the Army for 25 years, went in and started my own businesses, did a lot of networking within veteran organizations and veteran small businesses, and landed over here. And it's been a really good spot for me for the past 5 years. Our mission, the first few slides about our organization is important because I want everybody to know that you need to talk about your organization, know your organization inside and out. Because that's one of the ways people can give back, is just sharing about what you do. So MACV, we've been around for 32 years, and our sole mission is on ending veteran homelessness in Minnesota. Next slide. Who we serve, like most everybody here, veterans are our primary clients, and it's working with everybody that's experiencing barriers to housing. In Minnesota, we have no military bases, but we have a population of just over 380,000 people, veterans and people who have served in the military. So we have a large population, and the same percentage of homelessness happens here in Minnesota as it does everywhere else. So we have our hands full every day. Next slide. Where we're at, we are solely based in Minnesota. Our services kind of cross the borders once in a while, but I have to update these numbers. We're at 100. We're at 127 as of this week, staff members in 3 regional offices, and then we have satellite offices throughout the state of Minnesota, so that we can cover the entire state, and that we have coverage and support all throughout wherever veterans find themselves in Minnesota. Next slide. It used to be really easy to talk about how we did our business because we had 3 pillars. We did housing, vet law, and employment. But we've found that we really needed to have a unique path for every single veteran that comes through. And this comprehensive approach really touches in a lot of different program areas throughout our organization. And we've expanded it into landlord relationships, subsidy programs, subsidy navigators, financial navigators, our emergency housing program, justice involvement, and healthcare navigation. Just because not every veteran that qualifies for the VA wants to use the VA. So having all these different programs allows us to make sure that we're providing the ongoing support for when veterans come to our organization. Next slide. And then housing. A lot of our corporate donations tend to go back and support our housing. And I'm going to highlight some of our corporate partners in the next part of this presentation. But in Minnesota, we do transitional and permanent supportive housing. So we own 23 transitional homes. These are all single family homes, and with a total of 93 beds. And then we have 110 permanent units for our permanent supportive programs, along with 8 ADUs. So the ADUs are new, and we find them that they're just one more resource that we can use. Not every veteran wants to live in a house or in an apartment, and they're really flexible. And the other nice thing about an ADU is it allows us to use land that we already own. By taking and removing a garage, we can put another home back there, and it just gives us one more option. And then lastly, I always have to include our landlord engagement program within our housing options, because the landlord engagement program is where we have staff that work directly one-on-one with our landlord partners throughout the state that are working and providing leases and housing. And veteran clients that have experienced homelessness usually tend to be not very good clients the first few months. And so working through those expectations and giving landlords someone to call, one number, one person to talk to, and say, what can I do? How can I, what's the plan? And we can get a case manager to talk with the veteran and continue that to avoid an eviction. It saves us money, and it's just a really good way to encourage local community to help expand the housing that we have. Next slide. This is a quick video that's going to talk about how we highlight just one of our partners.
We are live at Target Field where veterans are gathering today. The Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans, MACV. I'm telling you, they are changing lives, and they're doing it with your help. And the goal is simple. The way to get there is a lot of work, but the goal is ending veteran homelessness in Minnesota. The reason we are out here today, the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans, or MACV, they are the driving force to provide services to veterans to help them out of homelessness.
Proudly effort everyone has made help construct the homes and that's gone into it, and the volunteers for that. But also really highlights the need that we do have veterans that are in need in our own community.
This is our transitional home for veterans who are homeless and need a place where they can stay and begun the rebuilding process of acquiring and maintaining permanent housing.
It's been 2 years. I went from being homeless. I went from being, I mean, literally having the clothes on my back, nothing else. And now I own a company.
Housing First Minnesota partnered with builder Lennar and the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans, or MACV, the land donated by the city of Bloomington.
The 4-bedroom home was built by the Housing First Minnesota Foundation in Lennar.
So I share this video with you because one of the things that, I need to move to the next slide, is that we use that as a, not as a promotional and marketing material to show people what we're doing, but and how one organization can help make a difference and make an impact, but because that's also our way of saying thank you and giving Lennar as our partner. It shows them that the work that they're doing is making a continuous impact. And we've updated this video a couple of times as new homes have been created. So some of the highlights and partnerships that we've had here that are kind of a little more non-traditional I'd like to talk about are listed on this slide. So Lennar, you know, they're donor-directed funding. They want their money to go directly to building homes, and we're okay with that. And it's directly impacting, you know, the housing inventory that we have. And at the end of the day, we have mortgage-free homes and a great partner that's continuing to work with us. They also give us access to their trade partner network. You know, so they're the largest builder in Minnesota. They have thousands of people that work for them, and those independent trade partners also are within our donor database and are independent donors throughout the year. So we can always leverage and reach back to them. And the last thing about that relationship is they're also match partners. At the end of the year, they've given anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 as a matching donation for our end of year campaign to help encourage others to donate. The next one is Renewal by Anderson. This is an organization that we've been talking to, you know, for a number of years, and you know, their funding is they didn't want to give, they don't have direct funds that they wanted to really provide, but they wanted to do something. So last year we had a new building that needed to be renovated, and they said that's what we want, and they said we're doing all the windows in this building, and it was about $80,000 worth of windows, and having that saves so much money by having that service. And then they started providing the volunteers to do that project and the follow-on projects. So they have 2 more buildings lined up for us, with the goal that every building that we own that needs new windows, they're going to provide over the next 5 years. The next 3 are Allianz, 3M, and Synchrony. These are interesting because if you were to look at them as foundations and their philanthropic giving, we don't really nest within their goals and their ways of giving. But by engaging with their employee groups, their employees have made us their partners of choice and have had employee-directed giving that has come back to us every year. This last year, Allianz picked us for the third time in a row with a $25,000 match. 3M provides us donor-directed funding along with the volunteers for our end-of-year events, and Synchrony is doing all three of those things. And we wouldn't be able to have that relationship without the employees of those organizations supporting our work. And then lastly, Mid-Country Bank. This is an organization. They don't have grant opportunities, but what they want is just general operating funds to support the work. By working with them and presenting the work we're doing and how we're doing it, they've come along and for the past 3 years have given us $100,000 each year that goes to general operating funds that we can use to support all the other grants that we have and fill those gaps for the needs of the veterans that we serve. Next slide. So standardized plans for giving and for working with corporate partners. You know, there's really just 4 elements. It's understanding your giving programs, building the relationships, aligning with your mission and values, and then tailoring your proposal to them. And really, it's each one of these things this is the end state where you want to have documented, like Kate was talking about each organization, is like, who are the people in these organizations that you can talk to that want your organization to be important, and how they can move and tell you about the things that organization has available to them, whether it's a volunteer opportunity or it's a giving program or just a connecting of network for additional resources that you can partner with. Next slide. So part of our MACV strategies when it comes to working with our corporate partners is continuously doing 3 things. And one is establishing contacts with all our corporate partners. That includes researching philanthropic giving, how they give, where they've given in the past, requesting to present with military or employee resource groups. So many corporations have military staff that have programs that they come together and they want to know how that organization can give back. Getting with those organizations and getting to know them is the best way in and finding out more about how the corporation can give back to you. Networking and community engagement. We're always working to have our staff working throughout the community, and it's important to join and be part of coalitions and your community organizations, so you can hear what other partners are doing, so you know what's kind of happening, what's in what's the need across the spectrum. Networking and requesting to speak within veteran service organizations, so your VFWs, American Legions, DAV, there are hundreds of them. Every state has them, but a lot of these organizations is just about asking, can I come present? Can I talk about what we're doing? And letting them know how you're serving the veterans in their community. And then lastly is connecting and finding new relations with your current sphere. Staying in communication with the people you already know and finding out where they're working, what they're doing is the best way to find those new ins and to find out where you can engage with the different corporations that are right there in your community or in the other areas. Because you saw in Minnesota, you know, we're in Duluth and Rochester, and it's 300 miles apart. There are partners all across the state, and having that reach really helps out by letting those individual employees keep us current in what they want to do. Next slide. One of the things, and this will go again along with what Kathy said, it's setting the stage. Most of the homework, that we need to do is setting the stage before you can engage with anybody. The important things that I have listed out here really are kind of that day-to-day that you got to do to make sure you have yourself in the right position to ask for money or to ask for a service or volunteers or some other type of some other type of unique opportunity. Knowing how your organization works. I showed you that we have lots of different programs. I spend most of my day talking with different staff members and hearing about how their program's working, where they're falling short, what they need more of, so that I know this when I'm talking to our corporate partners, and it allows us to find that opportunity that we didn't know about. Leading your strategic communication plan. Being every day, review and be part of your creating your narrative and themes. You really want your audience, you want to engage with your audience and control the narrative that you're putting out there. This is your newsletter and your social media. Be active in writing those stories. Be active in telling the stories of the staff and the veterans you serve, and making sure that that's all scheduled out. And then look at your calendar for like different times of the year, you know, what's during the holiday season, during the summer season, what's happening in your community. So everything kind of flows and you're always staying ahead of it. Engaging with staff and leadership. This is the part where you get to be the coach. Learn to leverage the existing relationships that you have and networks that are already established with your staff. Having those people continue those relationships and making sure that they're asking the right questions, you can have them continue to do that work and find those other opportunities within partners that you maybe didn't know about. Identifying opportunities. The two main things that we have when we're giving presentations is, one, a standard presentation with a general ask. You can always give to us financially, you can give of your time or your service through volunteering, or you can help us by just sharing our message. But then having the list of ongoing potential donor opportunities that are unique or specific. This is where knowing your organization and what different building opportunities or program that's has shortages or has new or unique situations, having that ongoing list allows you to sometimes throw in that one more thing. Here's how you can help, and you never know when it's gonna happen. But just having that list available, sometimes someone will say, yes, that's what I want to do. I want to put in windows. I want to, you know, find people to serve at one of your events. Having it there is something just you got to have a list of. And then lastly, establishing our monthly donor review meeting. This is something that's critical in assessing what we do. So not only are we looking at opportunities and who we want to, our fundraising strategy, but we're reviewing each donation that comes in, making sure that we have an assigned contact with that organization, someone that they can reach out to, documenting the next steps, going back and making sure that our finance team knows if this is donor directed money or if this is, you know, GenOp money, and then find out and put in the notes so the next person knows what do we need to do next to engage this person, and what's our best chance for success. Next slide. Thank you for having me today. Feel free to reach out at any time, and I appreciate being part of this webinar.
All right, thank you, Sean, and thank you, Kate, thank you, Colleen, for all presenting. Those presentations were excellent. I want to take the time now to open up our discussion for Q&A. So if all our presenters can have their cameras on, we'll go through a few questions here until we hit time. I have a few ones here. I'm going to package this question into one. So this will be open to all our panelists. So if you are a small organization, how do you choose how to best spend your limited development bandwidth? And another part that I want to add to that is that if you are a small organization, can you give a little bit on like percentages of where their funding resources should come from?
Well, that's difficult without knowing the organization. I would say for the first part of the question, leverage your social networks. You know, use your board members, use your volunteers, use your other supporters to help get your story out and get the word out about your organization. That's going to be the least expensive way you can garner some support.
I'll chime in on this one. One of the things, if you're a small organization, when I started, we had no development program 5 years ago. And I think in the first year, we did a lot of, fundraisers, but the biggest success we had was establishing communication every day. Focus on the things that you do, telling the story of what you do every single day and getting it out there. Because if people know about your organization, they'll come to you if there's a need. You want to have that out there. So, our social media is easy. It's something that you have to constantly do, and there's a lot of apps out there that allow it, but to make it easy. But by having something every single day in front of potential donors and the general audience talking about you, that's super critical.
Yeah, impossible to answer really, because it could come from anywhere. But, in my experience, individual giving takes a huge amount of time and resources. It's extremely important. So then what's your bare minimum? One annual event and, a year-end appeal and one online campaign. Like, what can you do at a bare minimum to keep those folks engaged? But I find that, family foundations and foundations that are favorable to veterans, typically the deliverables are far easier than managing government contracts and managing, 500 to 5,000 individual relationships. So those should never be left on the table.
One more question here before we wrap up. Let's see here. Is there such thing as over communication? And if so, how do you find that line and avoid it? So how do you find that sort of happy medium to engage audiences and potential donors without coming off as annoying or overbearing?
Well, I might as well jump in because I was just talking about over communicating. On the social media side of things, only about 10% of all your messages reach any part of your general audience. And that's the standard rule. So like when it comes to that side, you can't over communicate. When it comes to like newsletters and publications and those things, we have a battle rhythm of once a month. We have a newsletter that comes out, and people that subscribe to it will subscribe. And I don't take it personally when someone doesn't, they unsubscribe. That's perfectly fine. I still have their their address. We can mail them stuff. And then we try to focus, though, is that a lot of our communication goes out about the organization. People aren't offended when you're just talking about what you do, telling stories, sharing the good news. And then we layer in when we ask for fundraising. We do exactly what Kate says. Every time we send out a message, somewhere there it says, hey, if you want to support us, there's a donation button. It's always there, but it's really about, sharing our work. So I personally don't feel like you can overshare the good stuff. And then when it comes to fundraising time, you focus on those events at that time.
I'm in total agreement with what Sean just said. Unless a donor specifically tells you, I only want to hear from you twice a year, say, for example, then I don't think you could over communicate as long as you're communicating the right messages.
All right, Colleen, you want to chime in, or are you good? Okay, great. So we are at time. So I want to wrap this up very quick so everyone can go on and continue with their Thursdays. Again, I want to give a huge thanks for our panelists who gave very, very insightful tips and advice on how to carry out your fundraising strategy. I also want to give a huge shout out to our attendees who helped make this Q&A possible. And of course, a shout out to the Home Depot Foundation. A couple things I want to leave off with as before you guys all head out. Our next webinar is on Wednesday, same time, 3 o'clock. It's going to be on data and program compliance. So if you are interested, if you have data people within your staff, feel free to send out the registration link to the webinar, which you can access on nchg.org. A copy of the recording and slides will be sent out to you all, or all the attendees, through your email that you registered with. So tomorrow you should receive all of that stuff, as well as any additional resources that might have come throughout the session. So last thing is we also have the Road Home podcast that releases every Thursday. So if you are really interested in the housing side of things, feel free to tune in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Episodes release every Thursday, and they'll be going on until, I believe, November 19th or 16th, one of those days. The next episode will be dropping tomorrow, which will be on the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing. And there are 3 episodes out right now on solidarity, community land trusts, and housing cooperatives. So I hope to see you all next Wednesday, and also see you listen to the podcast. And again, thank you to our presenters, and hope to see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
I believe that's it. Great.